The paper trail. The false dawn painted Medicine Hat's eastern horizon in shades of iron and ash as James sat at Dr. Harrison's dining table, studying Pemberton's supposed confession letter by lamplight. The document lay before him like a coiled snake, neat handwriting, official territorial seal, every word carefully chosen to absolve the consortium while damning a dead man. Eleanor moved quietly in the kitchen, preparing coffee despite the early hour. Neither of them had slept. Thomas remained upstairs in the guest room, finally resting after another night of troubled dreams. Sarah stood at the front window, rifle cradled in her arms, watching the street where consortium watchers had maintained their vigil through the darkness. "It's too perfect," James said, not for the first time. Every phrase calculated to close doors rather than open them. Edmund Whitmore arrived as the real dawn broke, his carriage rattling to a stop outside. The elderly lawyer moved with surprising speed for a man of 68, his leather satchel clutched tight against his chest. Sarah opened the door before he could knock. "I came as soon as I received your message," Whitmore said, shaking frost from his coat. "The marshal allowed me to examine the letter for exactly 10 minutes before he had to file it officially. I made notes." Dr. Harrison emerged from his study, where he'd spent the night writing letters to territorial officials in Regina. "Coffee's ready. Let's see what we're dealing with." They gathered around the dining table. James, Eleanor, Sarah, Daniel, Harrison, and Whitmore. The lawyer spread his notes beside the original confession letter that James had copied in his hurried examination at the surveyor's office. "First observation," Whitmore began, adjusting his spectacles. "The handwriting is Pemberton's. I've seen enough of his land office documents to be certain. But the phrasing," he tapped a paragraph with one gnarled finger. "This section about acting on my own initiative to challenge the Mackenzie claim uses legal terminology Pemberton wouldn't have known. He was a surveyor, not a lawyer." Sarah leaned forward. "Someone dictated it to him. Or he copied it from a prepared text," Whitmore said. "Notice how the sentences flow in the first half. Natural, conversational, then here." He indicated the middle section. "The language becomes formal, almost legalistic, pursuant to territorial regulations and in accordance with established procedures. Not words a frightened man would choose while writing a suicide confession." James felt a cold clarity settling over him. They gave him the text, told him what to write, or wrote it themselves and forced him to copy it. Eleanor said quietly, "Either way, he didn't compose this freely." Daniel pointed to another section. "What about this part where he claims he was paid $500 by parties unknown to file the challenge? That's convenient. Unnamed sources, untraceable money." "Exactly," Whitmore said. "It provides a motive for Pemberton's actions while creating no trail back to the consortium. The money supposedly came from a man whose name I never learned, who approached him in a Medicine Hat saloon. Impossible to verify or disprove." Dr. Harrison set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "The question is whether we can prove this in court. The marshal has already filed it as official record. Judge Carmichael in Fort Macleod will see it as a legitimate confession unless we can demonstrate coercion or forgery." "Johann Schmidt saw Pemberton meeting with the consortium agent," Sarah said. "That proves coordination." "It proves a meeting occurred," Whitmore corrected gently. "Not what was discussed or agreed upon. The consortium's lawyers will argue the meeting was innocent. Perhaps the agent was asking about filing procedures or inquiring about other properties." Schmidt didn't overhear their conversation. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Harrison's mantel clock. James stared at the confession letter, feeling the weight of how thoroughly the consortium had covered their tracks. Pemberton dead, his confession filed officially, no witnesses to contradict it. "There has to be something," Eleanor said, her voice tight with frustration. "Some inconsistency, some proof that this was staged." Whitmore removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly. "There might be. The timing troubles me." "How so?" James asked. The lawyer replaced his spectacles and consulted his notes. "According to the marshal, Pemberton's body was discovered at approximately 7 o'clock yesterday evening by the building's night watchman. The coroner estimates time of death between 5 and 6 o'clock, shortly after your confrontation at the bank. The confession letter was found on his desk, the ink barely dry." He wrote it just before killing himself, Daniel said. Or someone wrote it just after killing him, Sarah countered. Whitmore nodded slowly. Here's what troubles me. At 3:15 yesterday afternoon, Pemberton was at the land office, conducting his normal duties. Multiple witnesses saw him. At 4 o'clock, he met with the consortium agent. Johann Schmidt witnessed that meeting. Then, supposedly, between 5 and 6 o'clock, he became so overwhelmed with guilt that he wrote this detailed confession and took his own life. That's less than 2 hours, James said, understanding dawning, from conducting normal business to suicide. Precisely, and consider the confession itself. It's 3 full pages, written in neat, careful script. No signs of emotional distress in the handwriting, no crossed-out words or corrections. A man contemplating suicide would show some agitation, some loss of control. This reads like a carefully copied document. Eleanor stood abruptly, moving to the window where dawn light now flooded the room. They killed him. After Johann saw them meeting, after we exposed their coordination, they killed him and staged it to look like suicide. That's my belief, Whitmore said. But proving it will be extraordinarily difficult. The marshal is treating it as suicide. The coroner will likely rule it suicide. Without physical evidence of struggle or witnesses to the actual death, we're left arguing circumstantial inconsistencies. What about the meeting Johann witnessed? James asked. If we can establish that the consortium agent threatened Pemberton. We'd need to find the agent, Whitmore interrupted, and he's nowhere to be found. I made inquiries last night. The man who's been watching your family so openly has disappeared, hasn't been seen since yesterday afternoon. Sarah turned from her window post. Because he's the one who killed Pemberton. They sent him away before anyone could question him. Dr. Harrison had been listening quietly, his physician's mind working through the evidence. Edmund, could the coroner be persuaded to conduct a more thorough examination? Look for signs of struggle, coercion, anything inconsistent with suicide? Dr. Hendricks is a careful man, but he's also cautious, Whitmore said. He won't risk his professional reputation by challenging an apparent suicide without compelling reason. And the consortium, if they orchestrated this, would have been careful to leave no obvious signs. James felt the familiar weight of fighting an enemy with unlimited resources and no scruples. Every move they made, the consortium countered. Every witness they found, the consortium eliminated or intimidated. There's another angle, Eleanor said, still standing at the window. The confession mentions $500 in cash. If Pemberton was actually paid that much, there should be a record. Bank deposits, purchases, something. If we can prove he never had that money, it undermines the entire narrative. Whitmore's expression brightened slightly. That's excellent thinking, Mrs. Mackenzie. Pemberton lived modestly, kept regular hours at the land office. If he suddenly had $500 in cash, he would have done something with it. I can make inquiries at the bank, check if he made any unusual deposits or withdrawals in recent weeks. Carefully, James cautioned. If Cornelius Webb is feeding information to the consortium, we can't let him know what we're investigating. I'll be discreet, Whitmore promised. I'll frame it as executor business, reviewing financial records of a deceased territorial employee. Perfectly routine. Footsteps on the stairs announced Thomas's arrival. The boy appeared in the doorway, his arithmetic book clutched to his chest like armor. His eyes went immediately to his parents, assessing their expressions with the premature wisdom that came from too much exposure to adult fears. Is breakfast ready? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Brennan emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron. Just finishing the biscuits, love. Come help me set the table. Thomas moved to comply, but his gaze lingered on the papers spread across the dining table. Is that about the man who died? The adults exchanged glances. James had chosen honesty with his son before, refusing to shield him with comforting lies. He saw no reason to change that approach now. Yes, James said. We're trying to understand what really happened to him. Did the bad men kill him? Thomas asked, his directness cutting through adult circumlocution. We think so, Eleanor said gently, but we're not certain yet. Thomas nodded, accepting this with the same quiet resignation he'd shown for weeks. Will they kill us too? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah moved from her window post, crossing to her brother and placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not if we can help it," she said. "That's why we're being so careful, why we're staying here instead of at home. We're not going to let them hurt us." Thomas looked up at his sister, and James saw something shift in his son's expression. Not quite belief, but perhaps acceptance that the adults in his life were doing everything they could. "Okay," Thomas said. "Can I have jam on my biscuits?" "All the jam you want," Mrs. Brennan promised, ushering him toward the kitchen. When the boy was out of earshot, Whitmore spoke quietly. "He's remarkably composed for his age." "He's had to be," Eleanor said, and James heard the pain beneath her words. "No child should have to ask if they're going to be killed." "No," Whitmore agreed, "which is why we must end this. The consortium has shown they'll murder anyone who threatens their interests. We need to build a case so strong, so public, that eliminating witnesses becomes pointless." James gathered the papers, organizing them into neat stacks. "What's our next move?" "I'll investigate Pemberton's finances today," Whitmore said, quietly, through proper legal channels. "If we can prove he never received that $500, it undermines the confession's credibility." "I'll continue writing to my contacts in Regina," Dr. Harrison added. 3 men I served with during the Real Rebellion now hold positions in the territorial government. They'll make inquiries about the administrative challenge, apply pressure from above. "And we wait for Thomas Garrett," Sarah said. "He's the key to everything. Once he arrives with Blackburn's evidence, we can connect the consortium to multiple murders, not just Pemberton." "Assuming he makes it here alive," Daniel said quietly. The sobering thought settled over them. Garrett was riding north with evidence that could destroy the consortium. They'd already killed Blackburn to protect their secrets. They wouldn't hesitate to kill Garrett too if they learned what he carried. "We need to get word to him," James said. "Warn him that the consortium knows he's coming, that they'll try to intercept him." "The telegraph line north is still down," Dr. Harrison reminded them. "And sending a rider would take days. Garrett might already be past any point where we could reach him." Eleanor moved to stand beside James, her hand finding his. "Then we prepare for when he arrives. Make sure Medicine Hat is as safe as we can make it. Document everything. Gather witnesses, build our case so thoroughly that even if something happens to Garrett, the evidence survives." Whitmore began gathering his papers. "I'll start with the bank records today. If I find anything useful, I'll send word immediately. In the meantime, stay vigilant. The consortium has shown they're willing to kill to protect themselves. Don't give them easy opportunities." The lawyer departed, and the household settled into the strange routine they'd developed over the past days. Mrs. Brennan served breakfast while Sarah maintained her watch at the window. Daniel volunteered to make a circuit of the surrounding streets, checking for watchers and noting any suspicious activity. James found himself unable to eat, his mind circling the problem of Pemberton's death. The confession was too neat, too convenient. But proving it was staged required evidence they didn't have, witnesses they couldn't find, physical proof that had likely been carefully eliminated. "You're doing it again," Eleanor said softly, sitting beside him. "Doing what? Torturing yourself with what we can't control." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "We're doing everything we can, James. Whitmore's investigating. Harrison's writing letters. We're documenting everything. We can't manufacture evidence that doesn't exist." "I know," he said, "but every hour that passes, the consortium's version of events becomes more established. Pemberton's suicide gets filed officially, the administrative challenge stands unchallenged, and we're left fighting shadows." "Then we keep fighting," Eleanor said. "What else can we do?" What else, indeed? James looked around Harrison's dining room, his family taking refuge in a borrowed house, living on the charity of friends, facing enemies with resources they couldn't match. But they were alive, together, still fighting. That had to count for something. The morning passed slowly. Daniel returned from his reconnaissance with troubling news. The consortium's watchers had returned, 3 of them now positioned at different points around Harrison's house. They made no attempt to hide, standing openly on street corners, a visible reminder that the family was being monitored. "They want us to know we're trapped," Sarah observed from her window post. "Can't move without them seeing. Can't plan without them reporting back. Let them watch, James said with more confidence than he felt. We're not doing anything illegal. Let them waste their time and money on surveillance. But he knew it was more than surveillance. It was intimidation, a demonstration of power. The consortium could afford to post men indefinitely, could maintain pressure until the family broke. Mid-afternoon brought Edmund Whitmore back, his expression grave. He waited until they were gathered in Harrison's study, door closed, before speaking. I found something, he said. Or rather, I didn't find something. Pemberton's bank records show no unusual deposits or withdrawals in the past 6 months. His account balance at the time of death was $17.32, his regular salary minus his regular expenses. No sign of any $500 payment. Which proves the confession is false, Eleanor said. It strongly suggests it, Whitmore corrected. The consortium's lawyers will argue that Pemberton hid the cash, or spent it immediately, or gambled it away. Without the actual money or witnesses to its transfer, we're still dealing with circumstantial evidence. James felt frustration building. There has to be something more concrete, some proof that can't be explained away. Whitmore hesitated, then spoke carefully. There might be. I spoke with Dr. Hendricks, the coroner, in his private capacity, asked him, as one professional to another, if he'd noticed anything unusual about Pemberton's death. He was reluctant to discuss it, but eventually admitted that the body showed some minor bruising on the wrists and upper arms, consistent with restraint, though he'd attributed it to possible struggle during the suicide itself. Or consistent with someone holding him down, Sarah said. Precisely. But Hendricks won't put that in his official report without compelling reason. He's already filed preliminary findings of suicide. Changing that now would require him to admit error and invite scrutiny of his professional judgment. Dr. Harrison spoke up from behind his desk. I could examine the body myself, provide a second medical opinion. As a physician, my assessment would carry weight. The body has already been released to Pemberton's sister for burial, Whitmore said. She arrived on this morning's stage from Calgary and claimed him immediately. The funeral is scheduled for tomorrow. Convenient timing, Daniel observed. Very convenient, Whitmore agreed. Almost as if someone wanted to ensure the body was buried quickly before any additional examination could be conducted. James stood abruptly, unable to contain his restless energy. So we have circumstantial evidence, suspicious timing, and a confession that doesn't match the facts, but nothing we can prove in court. Not yet, Whitmore said, but I'm filing a motion with Judge Carmichael requesting suspension of the administrative challenge pending investigation of Pemberton's death. I'll argue that the challenge was filed under duress or false pretenses, and that Pemberton's subsequent death raises questions about the legitimacy of the filing. Will the judge grant it? Eleanor asked. Possibly. Carmichael is a careful man, but he's also fair. If I can present enough inconsistencies, he might order a delay while a formal investigation is conducted. How long would that take? James asked. Weeks, possibly months, but it would buy us time. Keep the challenge from proceeding while we gather more evidence. Time. Always time. The one thing they never seemed to have enough of. Whitmore departed to begin preparing his motion, and the household settled into evening routine. Mrs. Brennan prepared supper, while Thomas did his arithmetic lessons at the kitchen table, his pencil scratching steadily across slate. Sarah maintained her watch, noting the changing of the consortium's guard, one watcher replaced by another in a rotation that suggested professional organization. James found himself at the study window, watching Medicine Hat's Main Street as dusk settled over the town. Somewhere out there, Thomas Garrett was riding north with evidence that could end this nightmare. Somewhere to the south, the consortium's leadership was planning their next move, deciding how to eliminate the threats to their operations. And here in this borrowed house, his family waited, trapped between hope and fear, between the law's slow machinery and the consortium's quick violence. Papa? James turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, arithmetic book in hand. Yes, son? When can we go home? The question that had no good answer. James crossed to his son, kneeling to meet his eyes. I don't know yet, he said honestly. We're working on making it safe, but it takes time. Thomas nodded, accepting this with his characteristic quiet resignation. I miss my room and the chickens and seeing the prairie from my window. I know, we all do. But we're safer here? Yes, much safer. Thomas considered this, his young face serious. Then we should stay until it's really safe, not just a little bit safe. The wisdom of children, James thought. His son had learned to measure safety in degrees, to accept that absolute security might never come. That's exactly right, James said. We'll stay until it's really safe. Thomas nodded and returned to the kitchen, leaving James alone with his thoughts. Through the window, he watched the consortium's watcher on the corner, a lean figure in a dark coat, making no attempt to hide his presence. They were being patient, James realized. Not attacking, not threatening, just watching and waiting, because time was on their side. Every day that passed, Pemberton's death became more established as suicide. Every day, the administrative challenge stood unchallenged. Every day, the consortium's version of events became more difficult to contradict, unless Garrett arrived with evidence that changed everything. James stood at the window until full darkness fell, watching the watcher, wondering how much longer they could sustain this stalemate. The consortium had resources, patience, and a willingness to kill. The Mackenzies had truth, determination, and increasingly fragile hope. Somewhere to the north, a Pinkerton detective carried evidence that might tip the balance. If he made it through, if they survived long enough to use it, if the law moved faster than the consortium's next attack. Too many ifs, James thought, but they were all he had. He turned from the window as Eleanor called him to supper, leaving the watcher to his vigil in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring Whitmore's motion, Harrison's letters to Regina, and whatever new moves the consortium chose to make. Tonight, his family was safe, together, and still fighting. It would have to be enough.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.